Ready? Okay, good morning. There was a talk Ludwig von Mises gave on money, and he said, I think I have 45 or 50 minutes to talk to you today about money. This is simply ridiculous. This is impossible. And I'm not Ludwig von Mises, but I have 2 hours. Um, so I plan to discuss money with you. But uh, first, we have to understand that money is an institution of praxeology. What does this mean? Um, a lot of people think that we can have people spending money or we can have the government that spends money. And as Frederick Bastiat said, the state is the great fictitious entity which people try to live at the expense of everyone else. But I think what may help us understand this social opportunity cost of whether we can have government spend money or people and markets, private individuals spend money is this use of the term democracy or market democracy, this society that if we are the government, then what the government spends is at the opportunity cost of what we as individual citizens could be spending. And I'll elaborate on this in a little bit, but the primary question I want to ask you, uh, and this comes from a more philosophical perspective, the question is, what is a greedy price? We use money to evaluate goods and services based on prices, but in college, I remember I took a class on introduction to ethics, and the professor said that you shouldn't charge more for a good if it is absurdly more expensive than what it costs to make. So you shouldn't charge too high of profits because then it becomes greed. And this is a sin. So the question is, what's a greedy price? There was a coffee shop in Auburn or in Alabama that I went to. They didn't charge prices. They just charged donations. So there was no price for the coffee, but you can voluntarily donate. And what happened was people were donating more. It was just like tips. They're 100% funded by tips. So people were paying more for an average price of coffee just based on tips. So if we're discussing, markets and ethics, then what's ethical? What's an ethical price to charge? Furthermore, what's a greedy wage? If a wage is a price of someone's labor, uh, at what point does a wage become, no, this is too greedy? If I want to buy some tacos, why can't I make the argument that charging $2 for a taco is not too greedy, or $1 for a taco? That's too greedy. I prefer 1 cent tacos or free tacos. That'd be then the most ethically superior uh, form of an economy in this rationality. So yeah, I just want to premise this lecture on money and prices with this question of how are we approaching our understanding of money and prices in the market society, um, and then the perspective of the critics of the market capitalist system saying no, prices, this is a function of greed, of capitalism. What we need to do is have a society where we abolish money, abolish prices, but we'll evaluate that further. So as Karl Menger demonstrated, and as many Austrian economists uh, point out, is that in order to understand what money is and the nature of money, we have to go to its origins. And understanding that money is a implication of praxeology. Um, oh no, the clicker went out. Yeah. Okay, so essentially in this lecture, we're going to go from the origins, mention Mises and his regression theorem, and uh, and 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 then we'll begin our analysis of what has the government done with our money. So just to touch upon where we begin. We begin with the subjective theory of value, that all value comes from the human mind. There's nothing innate in a specific good that gives it value. There's no intrinsic value other than the value we assign it. Because we can't comprehend the value of something until we have a use for a certain thing. And so then we'll get into what makes money valuable. It's not only its use, but its exchange value. And this specifically applies to a commodity money, and we'll go into like other forms of money eventually. Yes, when we look at the origins of money, as Murray Rothbard eloquently put it, it's impossible to understand the nature of money without going to the origin of it. And money originated on the free market. Professor Thornton pointed out I forget the term he used, but there's this theory that the state were the originators of money, that there was this issue of society, this system of barter, and we had to solve this double coincidence of wants, because if I make hats and you produce eggs, how can we make this exchange possible? We can only do it if you also want a certain amount of hats and I want a certain amount of eggs, but then we have to agree on what the ratio of exchange will be. So this is a whole mess. And thankfully, we had the state to come in and say, actually, we invented this thing called money and we'll distribute it. People can use it. And this is how we can have a civilized society. But this is not the case. This is a fallacy. Money originated on the market because of this system of barter, led to people praxeologically trying to pursue their own self-interest with subjective valuations and the entrepreneurial insight to see what is the most useful medium of exchange. This idea of do I have it here? This idea of what can be the most roundabout or indirect medium. So, for example, if I want to get a let's say some milk, and I sell hats, you sell eggs, maybe you sell or produce wheat, I can come to you, get wheat, knowing that you want wheat. So this becomes this indirect medium. And so this is the market process that tends towards discovering what is the most useful medium of an exchange that we can use for our economy. And we can analyze this and understand this not due to equations and mathematics, but to theory and history. And this is what the practical understanding of society allows for with this economic understanding. So the more re-exchangeable goods, that was the term I was looking for. What is the most re-exchangeable good? And this again is a detail of commodity money, something that's re-exchangeable, but that tends to become the medium of exchange. So when the commodity is exchanged, the currency unit becomes the unit weight of the commodity most of the time. For example, there's this article by, I'm blanking on the name, but essentially during World War II, or World War I, I believe, there was British troops who were trapped in the beginning of the army. I think it was World War II, 1939, German officers, and these troops received rations and cans of sardines and cans of peaches, and so they began to barter. Eventually, what happened was they got cigarettes, and they began using cigarettes as their medium of exchange. So cigarettes as the medium of exchange was not based on weight, but based on length. So it's not always that money tends to be denominated in the amount of weight, but it can also potentially be alternative ways of determining money, which is like 2.5 cigarettes for some can of peaches, 2 cigarettes for a can of sardines. Welcome, Jeffrey. Come on in. My mom's here too. Um, so yes, so essentially also what happened that we'll talk about with price controls and inflation. But towards the end of the war, people altruistically wanted to start shipping in cigarettes to the British prisoners because they figured out, oh, this is their form of money. Like, wouldn't it be great if we gave them more cigarettes, more money to help them buy what they wanted? And suddenly, overnight, they were setting the prices every day for a can of peaches, can of sardines. It was two cigarettes, it was one cigarette. Because all of a sudden of this inflow of cigarettes, prices went up. Peaches became 4 cigarettes. A can of sardines, 5 cigarettes. And they said, what is this evil inflation that has been bestowed upon us? Where'd it come from? Governments, unions. So they went to the German officers and they said, please, like, establish price controls. Obviously, that didn't work. There began shortages, black markets, decrease in the quality of peaches. People started poisoning them. Um, so this is a micro example of an economy that I think shows the significance of not only money, but the fact that money is a different type of good than anything else. And this is one of the most important points that I can leave you with this lecture. Not that I'm done yet, but that when we think of goods and wealth, wealth is what you can buy with the money you have. Um, we want more abundance, goods and services. This is what prosperity is. If we had a superabundance of everything, this would be like the Garden of Eden. We wouldn't have to struggle and sweat to attain what we want. Maybe we would still deal with the scarcity of time, but this would be the land of abundance. When it comes to money, money is not like other goods in the sense that we don't necessarily need a larger quantity of money. Money is a medium of exchange. So when you look at a piece of paper, a dollar or a euro, we're not using money in its direct possible uses. We're using for its indirect use, its ability to purchase, to exchange for other material, spiritual goods and services. Um, and we'll begin to analyze the effects of what happens when you do increase the quantity of money. There's also the phenomena of decreasing the supply of money, but we really don't run into that, and that's deflation. An increase in the quantity of money is inflation. Um, and another point of premising our framework for how we're approaching analyzing money and wealth in society is Professor Oppenheimer, I believe Franz Oppenheimer, said there's two ways to accumulate wealth. There's the economic means of producing something and exchanging it in society, and there's the political means. Politics, in this sense, you can make it synonymous with power. The means of power, the means of military might and force, of conquest, enslavement, capture, control. This is what politics is. Politics is the science of power. So what we understand from Say's law is that production precedes consumption, meaning that in order to spend money on something, it first you must acquire the means to spend the money, and second, that good or service has to be produced. How can you buy something that has not yet been made? You can't. It's impossible. So obviously, there's a temporal dimension to production and to consumption, but it's important to recognize that just this idea alone that if we gave all the money to government that they can pay for everything is fallacious for a couple reasons. One, the market has to produce it precedingly being purchased, and two, government doesn't produce anything. It like outsources contracts, construction projects. So you still need a quasi market to produce anything. That's why in the Soviet Union and socialist countries, when the government dictates what's going to be produced, there's shortages and surpluses, and usually it's shortages because the market mechanism is the the division of labor. It's the decentralized, dispersed knowledge of the millions of minds coming together to create a single pencil or a single good. You cannot, by one mind, one will alone, produce everything that the market has potential to produce. So anyways, let's continue forward. I'll mention this, the moneyish commodity characteristics. It has to be highly recognizable. People need to know what it is. These are the characteristics of a commodity money. It has to be marketable. People need to want it. If they don't want it, they won't use it. Governments have tried in the past to force via legal tender laws to accept something, some piece of paper or whatnot, as a form of medium of exchange. And there have been cases, societies where people couldn't use it because it wasn't valuable to them. So then there was the death penalty. People were put to death for not using a certain money. And that didn't even stop people because the self-interest of people is what leads people to society. And this is the point that the economic means is enhanced with the use of money. It's with the medium of exchange that we can have a deeper and more specialized division of labor. When you remove this, you really distort society, and we'll get into analyzing that some more. But that's why money is a praxeological phenomenon. Yeah, so it evolves over time. It has to be something that's portable, high value per unit of weight. Think of it like potency. You know what I mean? Drug dealers will maybe sell marijuana, but it's big and bulky. So if you want to sell something more potent, it will be stronger. It will be smaller. It kind of applies to money. That a better money is something that's more portable. So it's a relatively decent analogy, but it has to be divisible. Something which can be divided quickly and not lose its value. So butter, you can chop it up, you can divide it very easily, but it's not durable. So durability is another factor. Fish before refrigeration was invented, not so durable. It lasted only a short period of time. And it has to be rare, it has to be hard to find. So that's why the tendency over time, over centuries, was towards the metallic standard or gold and silver. And I think there's a debate of what's a better money. Is it gold or silver? Gold is the most rare, so it's more valuable, but then there's less of it. And you know, the value of a gold coin is more than a silver coin. So if I want to make smaller expenses, just a cup of coffee, how it's more difficult to divide a gold coin rather than silver pieces. So I think it's interesting, but I don't know which one per se is a better money. That's why one or two commodities tends to win out, and they go hand in hand. Then you have three: copper, bronze, and so forth. But this is the history of commodity money. This is where money originated from. Before the metallic standard, you did use wheat. People did use certain types of stones, shells, bottle caps were used on Yap Island. Yeah, so people have always been trying to evolve what money is, and money's not done evolving. We're still evolving, but we took a zig and a zag with fiat money, which we'll get to shortly. But yeah, these are characteristics of commodity money, which leads to what gold and silver is. So what are the benefits of money? Economic calculation can take place. Firms can use the profit and loss mechanism. There are an infinite number of prices under barter. If we're still under barter and I'm trying to sell a good, I'm trying to sell a cup of coffee, and you make hats, you produce eggs, you make milk, you sell fish, this can go on forever. How many pounds of fish are worth a cup of coffee? How many eggs are worth a cup of coffee? How many hats are worth a cup of coffee? So there's an infinite number of different exchange ratios that can exist under the barter system. But again, indirect barter, the benefit of money is that now we can produce prices based on a single common denominator, which is money. And prices, as we've began to analyze are something that are determined by the subjective preferences of consumers, not the amount of sweat or labor that went into producing a certain thing, but that is more a lecture for subjective theory of value. What we're looking at is money. Economic calculation. This is a core tenet of Austrian economics. This idea that because of money in the markets and the profit and loss mechanism is signals, it's information, what entrepreneurs are producing, if they should continue to produce that or produce something else. This is the fact that there's a scarce amount of resources in society. So we have to figure out what should these resources be used for? Where should they go? The profit and loss mechanism is signaling to entrepreneurs that if you're making more money, it's not a bad thing. This is actually a great thing. You're providing goods and services to people in the market, consumers, and they can recognize this with money paying you, profits. This is why Professor Daran mentions that money and the market is the language that is most important and essential for society. We can communicate, we can share ideas, but only in the market can we bring things to life. Can we bring actual goods and services, this lighting, the electricity, the coffee, the water, the air conditioning. All these things are brought by the market, not purely words and semantics and writings. So everything has a money price in terms of money. Is that true or not? People say like, "Oh, I'll never sell my soul." I think most people would if you gave them a price, if you gave them enough money, if they could donate it to charity. Maybe they would. I don't know. Uh, Walter Block uses the example that, if my son had cancer and the only way I could save him is if I sell myself into slavery, well, he makes the case, the legal, the moral case for why slavery should be legalized. But that's a price. It would have to be enough money to do something. So this is obviously applying to labor. But if you want to buy something, people say, "I'll never sell this." But if you give them enough money, I think they would. So everything has a price, and we know this only in demonstrated preferences. In the moment of action, I could say, "Yeah, I'd sell this cup of coffee for $10,000," but maybe I won't. Maybe this is the greatest cup of coffee. It makes me happy. I can never sell this. But maybe if someone offers me $10 million, okay, only at the moment of action. We can't say a priori what the price of something is. That is what the neoclassical economists, the mainstream economists, try to do with everything. They try to say in our graph of utility maximization, what brings the greatest number of happiness to the most amount of people. We've, through our empirical testing and mathematical models, have explained that this good, if priced at this price, can generate the most utility for society. That's all bullshit. But anyways, let's continue. Okay. So is money neutral or is it not neutral? And what does this mean? Uh, Mainstream economists will say that money is like a fixed yardstick. 12 inches is 12 inches is 12 inches. $1 is $1, $1. It's supposed to represent a unit of weight of gold, but this is what neutrality would signify. But this is not true, especially after 1971 going off the gold standard. Money is valued by people, whatever they think the value of it is. Even this textbook, I just looked at it. Guess what chapter money is on? The first chapter that discusses money. 29. Yeah. Chapter 29. They use markets and welfare before money. We haven't even began to really discuss market institutions yet because they can only occur and exist via money. So money is, and its understanding is a prerequisite to understanding how the market functions and operates. Mises said money is never neutral in the short run. Historically, governments have had to tax people when they want to pay for things, when they want to wage wars, but taxing is very unpopular. So when we still had coins in the metallic standard, governments clipped the coins. They would cut a little bit off the coin, keep the scraps, melt the scraps, create more coins. Now they have the coins, but the coins were devalued. There was more coins. So each single individual coin was less valuable. Um, so this has to do with this quantity theory of money and this idea of inflation that if you increase the money supply, each individual monetary unit is less valuable, which directly affects what your purchasing power is. Your purchasing power, if you have $10, may buy you something today, but if the quantity of money increases and the value of each individual monetary unit decreases, your purchasing power decreases. So what you're actually able to buy, um, what this means is that it will require more money to buy the same amount of goods and services. And this is what Mises emphasizes, is that, well, okay, so let me make this point that taxing was unpopular, so what did governments do? They began printing money. They went to the printing press and they covered it up with neoclassical economics and mathematics. People began thinking, oh, they're scientists, they're economists, they're professionals. They must know what they're doing. Um, and they started printing money and they hid it behind economics and the neoclassical framework. So they just printed money. So they increased the money supply. Now the value of money goes down. Your purchasing power goes down. What was 1913, 23? You just needed a couple dollars, a couple cents to buy you a meal, to buy you an acre of land, a couple dollars. Now, how much is an acre of land? How much is a meal? So what my point is that what you can buy today for $10, with inflation and inflationary environment, you may not be able to buy that same amount of goods tomorrow. And this is, I don't want to cut this short, so maybe I'll have to, yeah, this is why the quantity of money is different than any other good or service. Um, Mises also makes the reference that the ability to print money is similar to a drug user. And he says the issue with drugs is that you don't know when to stop. You don't know when you've had enough and you can't take much more. But when you're in it, you feel euphoric. When you're able to print money, wow, you're creating money at the snap of your fingers. You're not sweating at all. Uh, so it feels good. And governments are more interested in printing more money, changing the supply of money, than actually producing goods or services. This is the profession of bureaucracy. Um, so beware of this. Uh, and I'll jump around here, but because I think this can help demonstrate the implications of money production that we were discussing yesterday at lunch. The evil is not the DC super zips, uh, the people who produce the money, the first receivers of the money, the Cantillon effects, that the money goes to the banks and goes to the friends of the government and the government. Um, the evil is not that these people receive money and can pay for more expensive things, or the New York financial stock traders and investment bankers. That's not what's evil. The evil is that the money that is produced goes into things like the military-industrial complex and goes to paying for wars. As Randolph Bourne said, war is the health of the state. So war is the epitome of the institution of the state. Not only is the state inherently inflationary because it has this power to produce money, but that's not what's evil. The evil is that it pauperizes people, meaning that the money people have saved over time from their jobs, their earnings, their workings, um, becomes reduced in its value. So you have a nominal number of money in your bank account, your savings. But if more money is produced, then each individual monetary unit, the value is decreased, meaning it doesn't matter what the number is. If it's not valuable, it's not valuable. That's why if you look at 1923 Weimar Republic in Germany, people began using money to burn as fuel because it was no longer used as a medium of exchange. Um, so the exchange value for money went to zero in hyperinflationary systems, but the use value also got redirected. Instead of using it because it was no longer a commodity as a medium of exchange, it just became used as fuel, um, as toilet paper. I think I have. Um, I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but the purchasing power of money. We live better, 10,000 times better than the kings of Middle Ages, not because we have 10,000 times more amount of money, but because of the productive technological advances that people have made, all the millions and millions of people that have contributed to create better conditions for us. At one point, this economic system of this fixed pie idea was true. When the political means of capture, enslavement, exploitation were the only ways to really acquire wealth. But due to the economic means, this is what has exponentially brought people out of poverty, out of decreased infant mortality, increasing living standards, increasing lifespan, due to the economic system of markets and capitalism. Um, so this is Mises' regression theorem, which is basically the problem of the Austrian circle, which is, how do we know what the value of money is? Um, uh, and so Mises basically says, well, we have to go to the first day that a medium of exchange was used as a medium of exchange, the last day of barter. This is more of a historical point that Mises writes about in the theory of money and credit. I think right now it's interesting, but not so much of interest for us. In my next lecture, I have the point of hyperinflationary environments, but I definitely want to make a few more points on the problems of inflation. Um, I'll keep this slide up as I go through my final notes of this lecture. Professor Guido Holzmann has a great book called The Ethics of Money Production. It's more intermediate to advanced. But in this book, and I'll elaborate more in the next lecture on what he means, but he says that fiat currency is a juggernaut of social, cultural, and spiritual destruction. And again, next lecture, I'll go into the technicalities of what fiat currency is, how does it become produced and brought into the market. But yeah. Um, okay. So the final point I want to leave you with this lecture is that as long as we have a economy where the government or a few individuals have the ability to affect the quantity supply of money, whether it be 1% or 100%, then we will remain in a environment of inflation. So before we can discuss how to change um, and consider alternative environments, this is the most important point, that the quantity of money, when it is able to be manipulated and increased, will always lead to inflation. And in the next lecture, we'll begin to discuss more in detail how this process works and what some of the effects are of inflation. So that's my time. Thank you. And if there's any questions, I'll feel free to discuss them with you. Thank you. Yes.
Can money ever stop evolving?
No. Why? Why would it stop evolving? Is my initial consideration, my thought. Because the market for money is, the market theoretically is a dynamic, unfolding social process. So we're always going to be able to consider, is there a better form of a medium of exchange? And as long as we can consider that, we can evaluate. And probably over time, we'll have a more steady and consistent money and medium of exchange, but it's always evolving. It's slow or it's quick and rapid, um, if it needs to evolve quicker. But these are all pressures from the market process, from people considering. For example, Bitcoin was invented in 2008. People are still adopting it. Um, so it's relatively new. People are using it. So money, things can still be created. That's a digital service of a medium of exchange. It's not a medium. It's not a commodity, right? And that's actually the last questions of considerations I kind of wanted to leave you guys with is, are there more evolutions of money to come? We have the value system that's still being understood and developed, but Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist, mentioned the dopamine currency. That dopamine in our brain is what allows us to act. And I met this guy at a cafe, he's an artist, and he was mentioning like an art currency. If you're an artist, which in the entrepreneurial aspect, in the Austrian framework, everyone can be uh, doing entrepreneurial action or artistic action. In which case, like the value people apply to your art and artistic capabilities, maybe that could be a way to determine the purchasing power you have in an economy. I don't know. But I would say no, money doesn't stop evolving. What happened was with over the centuries, the flip from the commodity to paper money was done by governments to bypass this taxation system and to have the money, the power to print money. But just remember, there's nothing cheaper to produce than pieces of paper. And these are money substitutes. And I'll explain more on that, that it's not real money. It's fiduciary money. It's uh, it's a promissory note backed by the promise of the government, which requires 100% trust and 0% verification. So if you don't trust the government, I think that speaks to the value of it then. But yeah, do you like that? Do you think so? That's what I think.
I don't know. I don't have a fancy.
I don't think it stops evolving. We've got it went, from the praxeological, historical development of money, went to the metallic standard, and then this we're at the fiat standard. But maybe some people go to metallic standard, some people go to the digital service of crypto and Bitcoin. Some people may figure out other ways to have indirect exchange with some other process. Any other ideas for discussion? Yes.
Yeah, so as we talk about like the government prioritizing printing more money instead of producing goods and services. So like when we pay taxes to the government, are we basically like paying them a medium of exchange for a medium of exchange because the government isn't producing
Yes.
the goods and services.
Yes.
So it's like a
Yeah.
mediums of exchange for a medium of exchange.
A medium, like the provision.
Like we're using
Right.
like the government
Right.
is
Yeah.
a medium of like a
Sure. A facilitator for goods and services, is
Yeah.
that what you mean? Yes. This is the nature of bureaucracy, that it doesn't work based off the profit and loss mechanism that other markets do. That's what anarchy is the absence of a third party. So you don't need a third party to go buy a cup of coffee at the cafe. But the nature of government is saying, no, 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 you need us to help facilitate this exchange of you obtaining a cup of coffee. Because without us, that'd be anarchy. That would be wildcat coffee cafe consumption. And we couldn't have that. That would be unfair and unsafe. Um, so yeah, we pay via taxation or legalized legalized thievery, theft of what you've produced. So they take your money and then they say, yeah, we're going to help facilitate goods and services, roads, right? But that's because they have a monopolized uh, ability to facilitate to provide roads. But these things don't have to operate in this way. So I think that kind of roundabout answers your question. But yes, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's take a few minutes late.
Okay.
We'll come back. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.